General Kapoor, my ex-General Officer Commanding of 31 Armored Div. In fact, it is my privilege to have shared the dais with him. Brigadier Gurmeet Kanwal, Director Clause, distinguished guests, friends from the industry, academia, service officers, ladies and gentlemen. Well, firstly, I would like to correct a perception of Director Clause, if I may, because it would be presumptuous for me to respond to a comment of that nature. It should come from the environment, I thought. But I would like to say that communications are not restricted to radio sets alone. You know, they are an all-pervasive communication at the strategic level, at the operational level, and even at the tactical level. The ASCON network, the ARA network, which of course has outlived its time, but it was one of the first networks ever, mobile communication networks ever in the Indian Army, in the nation. And it was conceived as early back as 1960s. And thereafter, of course, we have developed to desktop messaging, where we can reach the farthest corners of the country through our Army wide area network, the ASCON network, the mobile cellular communication system, which we have deployed in some areas, and we are going to deploy soon in other areas. The cutting edge, there is a lot that needs to be done, and you would have heard about the projects of BMS and FNSAS, which I'll cover a little later. But that is just to respond to what Director Clause had said. Valedictory sessions, you know, I don't know, this word valedictory, it sounds a little funereal. You know, it is end, death. You know, but I would like to pep you up by reminding you that you got 3 days holidays ahead of you. And so sit back and relax. You must have, since through the day, heard many speakers speak about increased situational awareness, shortening of the OODA loop, self-synchronization, focused logistics, the ability for precision strikes, etc., etc. Now, these all stem from net centricity, and this is with the intent of essentially improving our mission effectiveness. And when I speak today, I'm going to dwell on two important components of transformation of a force to net centricity. And these two components are, firstly, the capability development required to become net-centric, which was, I think I said through bulk of the last session. And the second is, more importantly for the serving officers, the exploitation of net centricity to achieve operational effectiveness. So these, two domains I thought were the basic domains that I would talk on. First, we have approximately 15,000 kilometers of land borders and 7,500 kilometers of coastline, including our island territories. We are today faced with two very powerful, reasonably powerful potential adversaries with whom we have waged a large number of conflicts and wars. And it is unlike net centricity, which has been tried out to an extent in the West, where the forces have been pitched against relatively weak adversaries. We must also realize that net centricity at lower levels of integration, say at a battalion or a brigade level, is much easier as compared to net centricity, say at a brigade level or division or corps level. And we must also be cognizant of the fact that almost half of our 1.3 million strong force is perennially deployed in operations, whether it is an IB, LC, LAC, or CICT. And many of them in extremely remote and inhospitable areas with sub-zero temperatures. In fact, this reminds me that once I was having a dialogue about an aerostat with a company, and when we spoke about an aerostat being hoisted at a height above mean sea level of 2,000 to 3,000 feet, then they said that we can go maybe about 300, 400 feet more and nothing beyond that, because of the fact that the draft conditions would be such that it would be unable to sustain an aerostat afloat at heights beyond this. And when we talk in our context, we are talking about 15,000, 17,000 feet heights. So when we talk about net centricity in our context, we must first and foremost remember our geodiversity of deployment, our operational imperatives, and the force that we are pitted against. The Chief of the Army Staff has directed that we have to be prepared to fight across the entire spectrum of conflict situation. Now, when you go to the internet and press that try to get a hit on spectrum of conflict, one of the first hits that you would get is conflict of 2G spectrum unresolved. So, what I'm trying to say is, when we talk about spectrum of conflict, we are talking from positional to attrition to maneuver to asymmetric to virtual, and that also under a nuclear overhang. And as you are all aware, when we fought Obijay, it was almost a First World War type of operations that we had to undergo. The geodiversity, which I have spoken about, the continuous changes in technology, as well as the requirement of the users, which is a consequence of the changes in technology, which has been averred to by some of the speakers earlier, has driven us to a large number of disparate systems and networks. And today, we have a plethora of networks based on OFC, based on microwave, based on mobile cellular, and satellites and so on, and that indispensable component of radio set that Director Claus mentioned about in the tactical battle area. Therefore, all I wish to say as regards capability development, which I shall be touching a little more in detail later, is that capability development would be a major area of focus when we talk about net centricity. Now, to broadly touch upon challenges that are there for exploitation of the net centricity when we are able to achieve it. And let me also mention here that net centricity is not a goal in itself. I do not know if any force today can talk about being entirely net-centric, because in every process of this nature, it is necessarily an evolving process. Firstly, net centricity is not so much about networks, but the co-evolution of all facets of operations, logistics, command and control, training and HR. And it is less about networks and really more about networking. In the cognitive domain, there is a reduction in the OODA loop, and there is a diminished time for decision making. So therefore, there would always also be, notwithstanding whatever checks and balances that we put in place, as alluded to by one of the speakers here, there would be a information overflow, reducing in decision making, becoming a little more complex than it was earlier. Now, if the director clause allows me, I will just take 2-3 minutes for an aside. There is this profoundly philosophical book called The Alice in Wonderland. And in that, Alice, poor girl, falls through the chute, and thereafter, after she emerges from the tunnel, she is walking all befuddled, and she goes and hits a fork, road fork, and there are 2 roads leading away ahead of her. And there is, at that crossroads, there's a tree and there's this Cheshire cat sitting on top. And Alice, in that disoriented state, looks up at the Cheshire cat and asks him, "Where does this road lead to?" So the Cheshire cat says, "It depends where you want to go." So Alice says, "I really don't know where." So the Cheshire cat says that then it doesn't matter which road you take. So therefore, this fog of war, which we have been talking about earlier, may manifest in a different form because of the information overload. The fear of scrutiny of decision, third umpire. This is also a very important thing. When the entire organizational hierarchy, there is so much of visibility that the entire organizational hierarchy is watching as to what you are doing. That may also result in templating the commanders in their decision making. And like General Kapoor mentioned, I have no option but to support him on that aspect, that hierarchy of decision making, which we are used to, will get affected. And there may be a tendency of either higher commanders trying to influence battles of lower commanders, or lower commanders bypassing their responsibility and passing on the decision making process to the higher commander. So these are some of the issues related to exploitations which are more applicable for the serving officers than otherwise. I thought I would highlight them. Some of the other issues that we have to contend with are susceptibility of radiating media, which has always been susceptible to both communication and non-communications to electronic warfare. Cyber operations, which is a growing threat. Harvinder mentioned it, and I entirely agree with him that this, we cannot be totally devoid of fears or of threats if we are working in a closed environment. We have put necessary checks and balances in place. But again, as the threat grows, the vulnerabilities also grow. So this is a process and continuum which we have to address as we go along. But I wonder why anybody from the USA here, I don't know, why with US with their much touted technology have to strip search our former presidents and former Raksha Mantris. So if, a physical EA security is not at all desirable. Then sustenance of the network, bandwidth demand, like somebody mentioned about bandwidth, the radio sets being available. I've been through a large number of analysis of this, and but there is a limitation of spectrum availability. There would be a limitation of bandwidth even in the Stryker Brigade and USA. They are even today working on certain limitations of bandwidth. So, and this and the spectrum availability are linked, which will also have to be contended with when we talk about network-centric operations. The main thrust areas, therefore,